Yeah. Family, y'all. Just keep it tight, keep it tight, keep it tight. Oh, right. Yeah. Here we go.
And then the other scriptural reference that we have to the Eucharist comes from the Gospel of John. We know that Matthew, Mark, and Luke were written close to the same time period. We often refer to them as the synoptic Gospels because they sort of look through the same lens and the same perspective and often have the same stories, like we saw here with the Last Supper. John often has very different stories. Because John was the last to be written, John has the least human picture of Jesus. Does I remember, for instance, in Matthew and Mark, how is it Jesus crying out from the cross, "My God, why have you abandoned me?" No. By the time we come to John, there's a higher picture of Jesus, that Jesus is God. So what is Jesus going to tell us then in the Gospel of John? If we turn to John chapter 6, we often refer to John's words as the bread of life discourse. Verse 25, when the disciples found him on the other side of the lake, they asked him, "Rabbi, when did you get here?" Jesus answered, "Very truly I tell you, you are looking for me not because you saw the signs I performed, but because you ate the loaves and had your fill." Why are you all following me? Because I did a great trick with the multiplication of the loaves. You're looking for more, right? Verse 27, do not work for food that spoils, but for food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. So you can spend your life working for food that goes rotten. We all know how that goes, right? You buy whatever food at H-E-B. Not Twinkies and those things that have like millions of years of shelf life, but like vegetables and dairy products, right? We buy them. They have an expiration date because they spoil. Same was true in Jesus' time. You recognize how it is that you can work for that type of food that spoils, or you can work for food that endures to eternal life, food that the Son of Man will give you. Very truly I tell you, verse 32, it is not Moses who has given you bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you true bread from heaven. Go back to the story of the first Passover, when Moses brought the people out of slavery in Egypt through the Reed Sea into the Promised Land. They were in the middle of the wilderness now. Lots of food, lots of fast food joints in the wilderness? No. How were that many people going to eat? God sent them food. What was the food? We often refer to it as manna. Manna is a Hebrew word meaning, what's that? Literally, manna simply means, what's that? Because when people looked at it, they didn't know what it was. They believed it was bread from heaven because when they woke up in the morning, they found this crystalline substance on the plants. Modern day scientists believe it was some sort of excretion by insects or whatever it was. Who knows? But they thought it was yummy, and that was what sustained them, according to the story. That God sent quails, and they ate the quails. God sent bread from heaven, manna. What's that? This dew that seemed to appear in the morning. And so God gave this manna in the desert, and now what's happening? Jesus is saying in the Gospel of John, that's the bread that Moses gave from heaven, but my Father now gives you true bread from heaven, for the bread of God is the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. The disciples said to him, "Sir, Jesus, give us this bread always." What does Jesus tell them? These are words we're going to have to interpret throughout the centuries. Jesus said to them, "I am the bread of life." You got to love the Gospel of John because it's the most developed theologically, where there are many times where Jesus is saying, "I am this, I am that," right? I am the vine. I am the light of the world. I am the good shepherd. I am the sheep gate. All of these I am sayings, a lot of them come from the Gospel of John. And one of those I am sayings is right here. I am what? The bread of life. I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry. Whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. I'll satisfy their hunger and their thirst. Fast forwarding. At this, the Jews there began to grumble about him because he said, "I am the bread that came down from heaven." What do you mean you're the bread of life? Like we're going to munch your bones or something? They started to grumble. They said, "Is this not Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How can you now say, 'I came down from heaven'?" Verse 43, Jesus answered, "Stop grumbling among yourselves. No one can come to me unless the Father who sends me draws them, and I will raise them up on the last day." Verse 49, "Your ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness, and they died. But here is the bread that comes down from heaven, which anyone may eat and not die. If you eat this bread I give you, you will never die." We talked about how it was that baptism leads us from death to life. What are we seeing here with the bread that he's talking about? The bread of life leads us from death to life. If you eat this bread, you'll never die. I am the bread of life. Didn't he say that before in verse 35? He's repeating it again. He repeats again, verse 48, "I am the bread of life. Your ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness, yet they died. Here is the bread that comes down from heaven, which anyone may eat and not die. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats this bread will live forever. This bread is my flesh, which I will give for the life of the world." The reaction then, if we were to continue, is fascinating only because then many people started falling away. They thought Jesus was an absolute kook. What kind of crazy crack cocaine is he smoking here? Right? Verse 52, the Jews began to argue among themselves, "How can this man give us his flesh to eat?" Jesus said again, "Truly I tell you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you." Which leads us to believe that by this time, of course, we know already that people were sharing a cup and a loaf in his name. And so this was John's way of saying, it's through this sharing of the bread and this wine that we get salvation. 54, "Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise them up on the last day." And it keeps repeating the same things. Your ancestors ate manna and died in verse 58, but whoever feeds on this bread will live forever. Verse 60, if we were to continue, the disciples said, "This teaching is so difficult. Who can accept it? This is crazy."
So what you're saying is that everything that John says with regard to the Last Supper that was included here was not included in any of the others?
We don't want to say that everything that's there was not in the others, because he does have some things that are in the others, like Peter's betrayal and like Judas's betrayal. So there are some similarities to the stories. Mm-hmm. The entrance into Jerusalem, there are various stories that resemble the others. But when it comes to the Last Supper story, he doesn't include some stories, like this important scene of "take and eat, this is my body." And he puts in other scenes. What's the scene that we have in John? At the Last Supper, what is Jesus doing? Washing their feet. How interesting that John chose to focus on the washing of the feet, a symbol of service, rather than on, "This is my body, take and eat. This is my blood, drink this in memory of me." So John is very different from the other three Gospels, which is why we call those three synoptic. It's like looking through the same lens at the same stories. John is often very different.